to Storyboard. This is Shibani Gharat. In this episode of Storyboard, we have Kris Hoet, Innovation Initiatives Head, FCB Global, and the Chief Innovations Officer, Happiness, telling us why Sir John Hegarty should embrace technology. Kris heads the innovation initiatives at Happiness, an agency he co-founded, and also a role he fulfills for the global FCB network to which Happiness belongs. He calls himself an innovation catalyst and explains how the likes of Sir John Hegarty are partially right about thinking of technology as a toolkit. Let's take a look.
Lovely to talk to you.
Lovely
So
talk
to
you.
begin with, tell me why John Hegarty should embrace technology.
Well, I think John shares that opinion with more people, probably more senior people that have been in the industry for a long time.
Are you calling him old?
John is a little bit older, yeah. I still like him, so that's not a problem. What I think is there's a bit of a challenge with technology, that we get overly excited in the technology. And so what I talked about today as well is how the real challenge of the future is in imagination rather than in technology. Right. It's in imagining what it is that we can do with it, and in that imagination it needs to tap into how it tunes into real human behavior, how, because it's essentially about persuasion, it's behavior change, emotional changes, etc. And I think most of what technology does, or how technology people deal with it often, is a way to technical discussion. Right. We get excited about the tech, and so we start figuring out how it works, right, and we forget about making a beautiful idea that drives some emotion. We forget about that. And I think to John's point, and I think he should be more excited about technology than he is, but he's basically in a way saying the same thing, as in it needs to focus on technology. Just not maybe looking enough at how the technology could make these ideas, these newer ideas that are still really beautiful, but we're all at the same point. We're both excited about ideas. I think that's where we match.
Right.
We see.
To be fair to him, what he said was in his book, Hegarty on Creativity, is technology is the handmaiden of creativity. It's a servant. You have to use it well. Mm-hmm. So could you expand on that? If you agree with it, of course.
Yeah, no, I agree with it absolutely. It's part of the presentations that I will always do is talk a little bit about, I would always say there's two narratives in technology or digital. We focus only on one narrative. One narrative is understanding how the mechanics and the tools and the techniques and the code and how all of that works. And we spend a lot of time trying to figure that out. I think the first thing we actually have to figure out is something else, and is way more important, and that is how it has actually changed our behavior, right? So when I go to a store somewhere around the corner, where I live, and I want to order something they don't have, and the store owner says, I can have it for you in a week, then that is not good enough anymore for me, right, although I'm in a physical store. Why? Because in my mind, my expectation on delivery is much different, mostly through the e-commerce. And so I think we tap into most of the technology part as in essentially something with the device, with the code. But that's not the thing. It's changing exponentially, therefore our behavior is changing exponentially. And the first thing we need to do is figure out what the behavior is and how it has changed and how we tap into that. And then we need to know the right tools to make sure that we seamlessly innovate or come up with an idea that taps into that. But it's not about figuring out how the tech works, right? I showed some examples of how the technique of remarketing is used to do sequential storytelling. I know a person has seen something before, so I'll build up further to that story. And I make something really beautiful, idea, immersive storytelling.
So which example was this? Which brand?
This was for the Muppets. It's a simple pre-roll, but if you've seen something, the second time you'll see a build-up on that. And that continues for a while. And it gets ever more funny. And if you see the last clips without seeing the first one, makes no sense. The good thing is, because of technology, I know for sure you've seen it. Right. So I can, but we don't do it that way. Right. When we think of remarketing, for instance, as a technology, we think of banners that follow you around when you've been on an e-commerce website. Right. But that's how a tech guy defined what that is. Nobody makes an immersive idea, like an interesting idea with it. And I think what John and some others are trying to say, essentially, this is a toolkit. And a toolkit needs to be bring to persuasion, to bigger ideas, beautiful ideas that can help, evolve and help people understand new things. But it still is a toolkit.
Right.
I think what they downplay is the fact that you need to be more vested in understanding how the toolkit works, or you won't be able to understand how you can bring it to good use. So the balance is somewhere in the middle. The role of technology, we sort of estimate that a little bit differently. I think we need to invest more time in understanding how the toolkit works, but especially how it has influenced people's behavior, to come up with ideas that are more rooted in that newer behavior. I don't think you likely can still do it, but I think it works better if you don't come up with a big idea and then try and root it in. So that means there's got to be a bit more of an effort in trying to understand how all the technicality has influenced life to come up with newer, fresher, beautiful ideas. But it still is about the idea. John will probably talk to it about, firstly, about the power of the idea, downplay the toolkit a little bit because he wants to focus on that. I do get excited about technology, so I'll like to focus a little bit on, I get it, I'm an idea person, but it's important that you understand that.
You know, you wear two hats. You got the happiness hat, you got the FCB hat.
Yeah.
In one, you're an ideas person, you're also an executor, you also need your client to be happy for them to give you a check happily.
Yeah.
And when you wear the FCB hat, you're more of an evangelist. You know, you're almost trying to, tell people what's happening and get them to love what's happening.
Yeah.
So how do you balance those two hats?
For me, the mixture is interesting, and I think also for both of the companies, because I never wanted to be like just a traveling consultant.
Right.
That just sees interesting things and has sort of reverse engineer what that meant or how the briefing was, and then go talk about it. You're still versed in work with your own clients and actual briefings and discussions. So some of the challenges that you try and evangelize about, here is how I would deal with it, are based on, because here's how I try to deal with it, not based on something I read from somewhere else.
Sure.
And I think that balance is really important. And then sometimes what I see within FCB somewhere will help me drive some change back home, so to speak, in either the Brussels or the Saigon office.
So when you wear your evangelist hat, you're here in India, or more with your evangelist hat than your happiness hat. Tell me, how do clients absorb the changes that you're talking about, which is the creativity and technology? How much more do they need to understand of technology? Because they seem to think they know creativity. What about the technology bit? How do clients embrace it?
Well, I think we're conservative in our thinking. A lot of clients are, and that's not specific to India, but a lot of clients are conservative in thinking, mostly because they're sort of locked into the day-to-day and the actual problems that needed to solve. And it feels like the focus on newer technology stands in the way of solving the actual problem, where you're actually saying, no, you need that if you want to, because the problems are changing, the solutions are changing. And that is something that we try and focus on. So when I do the presentation I just did, when I do that presentation, I literally want to put some kickstarters, thought starters in people's heads, talking about a few concepts. One, the two narratives of digital. There's the toolbox, but there's also how it influenced our life, and you want to tap into that. We focus on the toolbox. There I agree with John. That's wrong.
Right.
You need to focus here, so understand then what do I need from the toolbox so I apply it correctly for that bigger idea. Another thing I will talk about often is there's a system of trying to drive some innovation within each company, whether that is FCB or Happiness or a client, that you need to try and figure out with smaller projects where you can learn a little bit so you can apply it in something bigger, where you can apply it so it becomes part of your daily routine. Right. And not only in campaigning, that is part of how you do HR, how you all of that.
Sure.
Within innovation, we tend to believe that it needs to be the one big overarching change or the one big project, but that doesn't work that way, because then the project becomes too big, and it becomes too big to fail or to even have a small mistake, because it's like business threatening. Start small, build up from there. And if you want to do that, I believe that everybody has to do that for themselves. You cannot say to your client or to your people in your business, in your agency, you all have to change, and not have anything changed in your own rhythm. If the world changes, that means that also
we have to change.
And so that means that I'll experiment in my own little world. That becomes experiments either in FCB or in Happiness. That become experiments, etc.
It is time for us to take a short break. This conversation with Kris will continue on the other side of this break. You don't go anywhere. We'll be right back.